Hello, wonderful. It is Sarah, and I'm here with Rachel Fairhurst, and we're talking trauma today. Complex trauma, PTSD, and both from lived experiences, and Rachel has had so much training in this area. So we're going to take some really complicated and difficult emotional topics and bring light and life and help to you guys today. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing really well today. Thank you. How are you?
I'm well. Now, if you're just listening to the podcast, you can't see mine and Rachel's matching, like kind of our white shirts. So we're kind of like the salt and pepper with her beautiful blonde hair and my dark hair. So we kind of giggled when we popped on because we were already so connected even before we met. So
we're in complete sync today.
Absolutely. So I'm excited about this conversation. So Rachel, where do you start with this? You've been through trauma, you've been through complex PTSD, and you want to feel better. You want to be better. Where do you start?
Okay, so initially the best place to start is actually getting the conscious awareness that you have a choice to change, and there is an option, and there is different dimensions of change that can occur for you. And it really starts with understanding that you do have the power to make a decision. And the decision can come from you've just had enough of life. You can't bear to live like this anymore. You want something different. And the way that happens is you're just going to find a moment where you realize that you can say no. You can say, no, I'm not having this anymore. I'm not going to continue life like this. Many people with complex trauma and PTSD have suicide ideation. And that's not necessarily because they want to end their life. They want to end how they're experiencing their life.
Can you explain a bit about what suicide ideation is? And I think that's a really, really, really important. It's not that you want to end your life. It's that you want to end your life as it currently is happening, correct?
So many people that have had extensive trauma histories and have PTSD, they are finding it unbearable to live anymore. So
which is super understandable, right? Like if you're this life is horrible and you don't want life to be horrible, and you've been trying to take steps to make it not horrible and it still feels horrible, where else do you go?
So essentially what the suicide ideation does is it a lot of people fantasize about killing themselves, fantasize about dying, think about how to do it, plot how to do it. And essentially what they're doing is trying to dissociate from their current experience. So the way around that is eventually you have to learn how to feel safe. Because if you don't want to be here, it's because you don't feel safe to be here. And you don't feel safe in your own body, in your own mind, in your own world, in your external environment. So you fantasize and try to find ways to be somewhere else. So because when you're not presented with a list of options of, oh, you have complex trauma, oh, okay, this is what you do to get better. You try to create your own way, to create a space where you're not in pain. So a lot of the time people with suicide ideation, it's because they have not been shown the way out. They have not been signposted. They have not been validated. So essentially, they've got no other option in their mind.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking, right? So heartbreaking and so understandable, right? When you think,
it's a very, very normal response to an abnormal experience.
I love that. And sometimes, was that in Man's Search for Meaning with Viktor Frankl? I think he made that quote too. Yes, it's such a good one.
Well, I mean, it's a very common saying in the trauma world. You're having a completely normal experience, a normal reaction to an abnormal experience.
Which means you're not broken. You're not messed up.
No,
there is hope.
It's all symptoms. People have behaviors, thoughts, emotions that make them feel crazy. But there are actually symptom clusters of complex trauma. It's not you, it's just the symptoms.
Which is especially important in the conversation around gaslighting, right? Because there's also that sense of making, a toxic person making someone feel crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in relationships, and most people that I work with in supporting them to recover from complex trauma have had narcissistic abuse from either parents.
Whoa. Most people you've worked with who have had trauma
Yeah.
It has come from the same source, not from war,
The
right? Not
highest
from car
percentage,
wrecks.
no, the highest population that have PTSD are rape victims.
Ah, I believe you. I
Yeah.
believe you, right? So I think that's really important to point out though, because I think it's like, oh, I've just got a bad marriage. I should be better than this. There's some people suffering through cancer. There's some people suffering through
Mm-hmm.
war. There's some people suffering through famine. But what you're seeing is that those relationships, both parental, romantic, partners, friend, depending on the context of the relationship, obviously, have major complex PTSD effects.
Yeah, so for example, I mean, people that are born into a complex environment and maybe their parents have had trauma themselves, or maybe not. When their child is experiencing something that's real and tangible, and then it is denied by either the perpetrators or the family system, essentially that doesn't only tell the child that they're lying and they made it up, it devalues their experience. So they have no guidance in somebody telling them that, yes, it's normal that you would feel like that after experiencing it. Essentially, the perpetrators are trying to take everything away from the child. So there's no evidence in the child's mind, which induces a sense of they don't know what's real anymore. And that's part of the gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, growing up in an environment like that gives you complex trauma because you have no guideline to go by that's real.
So an example, I'm trying to think of some examples of that. I want some clarity. You don't feel comfortable around an uncle. Mm-hmm. And you tell your parents, I don't feel comfortable around them. And they say, well, your feelings aren't real.
Silly.
Yes, don't be silly. Don't worry about that. But that could even be, you're not really hungry. You're not really tired. You're not really upset.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Constantly devaluing a child's experience. Like, I'm really hungry. Oh, no, you're not. Look at you. You've got a big enough tummy. You can last another hour.
Oh, how damaging. I mean, when you hear it, it's just like, oh, but I love your phrase, evidence in their mind. With my kids, I'll say, I need to do it more. Even as we're speaking, I want to do it more. What do your eyes see? What do your ears hear? What has been your experience? Like, let me strengthen what your experience is rather than, obviously I'm not gaslighting my children, but helping them in the world as they go move forward with everything, right?
Yeah, well, a really, really good one is, okay, so ask them what their experience is. Okay, so where do you feel that in your body?
Great. Yeah.
What does your body tell you? Oh, well, whenever I'm around Uncle so-and-so, my stomach hurts. My heart beats really fast. There's your evidence that something's not right.
Super important. And I want to strengthen that idea, because so many times it's like, oh, something's not right. I need to Google red flags. Something's not right. I need to study narcissism obsessively. Something's not right. Rather than seeing, oh, I get just a weird feeling, or I feel small, or I feel devalued when I'm around them. That is evidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of ways that, really common when someone's growing up and they're being abused, or they say, oh, Uncle Johnny did this to me.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the responses are, well, it's not really that much of a big deal. They probably didn't mean it. Are you sure that happened? Really? Did you not just see that on a film? You sure he would do that? Making them doubt themselves, making them think maybe it's not a big deal. They don't matter enough that it would be a big deal, right? So if you can remove somebody's value of themselves, then anything can happen.
Well,
measure it against either, do they?
Well, and remove their value of themselves and remove their clarity, right? I actually went through a really horrible October this past, there was a death and hospitals and all this kind of stuff that happened in October. And people were like, gosh, how did you make it through and not come apart? And I said, because I've been in situations where people cause me to not trust myself anymore. That is what kills me. That is what damages me. That is what hurts me. Anything else can be handled.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's really that bad. Have you seen it that bad in your life and other people's? It's like the top of the pyramid worse, to lose trust in yourself, in your own reality.
Well, that's one of the hardest things to overcome, and to not replicate the abusive relationships in your interpersonal world. So when a child is brought up and their immediate caregiver is the abuser, psychological narcissistic abuser, they are basically taught that whatever they think, whatever they feel, whatever they need, whatever they want, is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
None of that matters. That's completely irrelevant. So they're never taught to put themselves first, or to, oh, I feel really uncomfortable around this person. Oh, that's an indicator that this is unhealthy. Because their setup, their frequency and their resonance is in tune to respond to a narcissistic relationship. Mm-hmm. So if you can't set up a child's frequency and resonance with love and contentment and attention, and having that child's needs met, they will grow up to be somebody that attunes themselves to someone that will put them last and devalue them, because that's what their setup is. I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience that underpins this, and there is a lot of other research around. However, the initial attachment that we have to our caregivers is what sets us up. So in order to heal from that, we have to heal that attachment setup.
Yes, so good. So many good things in there. Some of you guys may need to hit like a 30-second rewind, and like, because she was dropping so many truths in that. So good, Rachel. So how do you change it? You notice yourself, you obviously knew you were in an abusive home growing up. You end up as an adult replicating because it feels normal. You know, so connecting
that was
with those
one
people.
Of the hardest things.
Yeah, for sure.
I was just replicating the abuse by choosing people that would make me feel like that, because I was used to feeling like that. And when somebody was nice to me, it would make me feel really uncomfortable, and I wouldn't know how to deal with that. And it would bring up even more trust issues, because why would they be nice to you, right? Why would somebody be nice to you? So it would be a trick. In my mind, I'd think, oh, it'd be a trick. So I'd go and seek somebody out that wouldn't be nice to me, because that felt more familiar. So the way you start healing, for me, the only way that happened was I'd had enough. I mean, I just really had enough. So it was a very complex sort of system around healing my attachment. Anyone that made me feel, if I felt comfortable around someone that I knew wasn't a healthy person to be around, I'd go away, locate that feeling in my body, figure out what was going on in my mind, figure out what was happening in my emotions. And then I'd think about, who does that remind me of? Who does that make me feel like I'm around? And it would often track back to a number of siblings, or my mother, or some of my mother's partners that had abused me. So whenever I'd get that feeling, I'd be like, this is a very familiar feeling and I don't like it. So where is it in my body? What's going on in my head? What are my emotions doing? Often my emotions would be like in terror. So if your emotions are in terror, it means you're still carrying a lot of the trauma. So then I would remove myself and know that that person I shouldn't be around. So that was literally the basics of how it starts. If you feel those familiar feelings and it tracks you back to a previous relationship or a parental setup, remove yourself from the situation.
Well, and I think in my own life, you know, when I start noticing myself responding as if I was responding to the people who had been hurtful towards me, and I noticed myself like, oh, I'm like trying to please them right now. Whoa, I'm thinking about, they had all of a sudden taken up all this space in my mind, and I am unsure of myself. Oh, I noticed myself really going into people pleasing and trying to make them happy, or agreeing with things I don't really agree with. And I love what you said. So being aware, taking away, and I love what you said. Who does that remind me of? Who else did I do that with?
Yeah.
Love that.
That's the very beginning of tracking it, really. And just like what you were saying then about people pleasing,
right?
It sets up your attachment. So I had a disorganized attachment. So I would try to over attach to these people, because if I was really close to them, I would feel safe, because I would know what's going on. And then then something might happen, or they'd respond to that, because in their misguided sense as well, would see that as me wanting to be close to them. So then I would go into ultra avoidant mode.
Okay, so disorganized attachment would be like a ping pong match.
Yeah, like yeah, on your internal systems. Yeah.
Yes, back and forth, which is a lot of fight and flight, a lot of, nervous system responses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than being steady and showing up for life as you are.
Yeah, exactly. So my initial attachment setup, it changes to different people when you're a child in that environment, because you have to match your attachment setup to be appealing to the perpetrator.
Can you say that one more time? That's very important. Yes.
When you're a child, you match your attachment setup to whatever perpetrator or adult you are around, because that will please them.
And keep you safe.
Yeah.
Quote unquote safe as a child.
Yeah.
Right.
So, for example, a highly avoidant mother, often the child will have a preoccupied, anxious attachment towards that person, that mother.
So important. Yes. And then that feels normal, that you go through life and then you go into relationships and it's like, oh, he's, emotionally unavailable. That feels normal to me.
Yeah.
Or angry or whatever it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you set yourself up to be able to survive in whatever situation you're in at the time.
Which is why it's not enough that, when people say, oh, I found the wrong guy, but, I just need to find the right guy. And it becomes like, this deck of cards shuffle in hopes that you end up, but your whole nervous system is saying bad people, quote unquote bad, I hate to use that, people who are not best for you are who feel normal to you. Yeah. Is that also, when people say, oh, nice guys seem boring? If you ever heard that?
Well, what that is because they're attuning their frequency and resonance to drama.
Okay. Yes. And
how it is.
it's frequency to drama. And now I've noticed that even in my coaching program, they get, at a certain point and they're like, I think I hit a plateau. And I said, oh no, this is what it feels like not to be in fight and flight anymore. This is what it feels like not to be like in drama, stuck in drama all the time. This is what it feels like to not, this is that peace you feel. Because at first they think it's a plateau. They think something's wrong. I was like, oh no, that's personal peace. Now you can decide where to go from there and make your life exciting, not dramatic.
Exactly. Very different. Very, very different. It took me years and years and years to be able to be okay with being at peace. I used to feel very uncomfortable with it. And that's just normal. It just takes more processing of the trauma, more layers to come out, working on the attachment and how that sets you up. And essentially accepting that it's safe to be in peace. As long as you're not around. The reason why you don't feel safe in peace is because you could still possibly be around people that are dangerous for you or unhealthy for you. So your safety mechanisms aren't going to come down. Your hyperarousal is not going to come down until you are eventually in an environment where you are safe from these sorts of triggers. So because peace is safety, isn't it?
Well, yeah. And there's that cognitive dissonance of like, oh, and that's, people say affirmations like, oh, I am safe, I am beautiful. It's like, but are you? Because if there's a piece of you that is not safe or, is on high alert, you're just lying to your nervous system.
And also those pieces can be invisible to us because they can be parts of the trauma that we haven't processed yet, because we still haven't found those bits. They're still not feeling safe enough to come to the surface to process. So we have these pieces inside of us that are still connected to the trauma that are still not ready yet. Ready yet.
So it's normal to kind of layer, and like as you move on, like certain things come up, because that's a question a lot of my coaching clients have had. It's like, oh, now I'm thinking about this, I haven't thought about that in years, and it's like because it's finally safe enough to process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's also so many people. I mean, it took me years to pretty much, fingers crossed, that is everything now, to get through it all, because a lot of it, if you think about your brain and your working memory system, it has a certain amount of digits in it, and if that's all taken up with trauma, and everything's taken up with trauma, and you don't have the right amount of blood flow in your brain so you can be relaxed enough, essentially the more you process, the more you free up from your body, your emotions, your mind, your spirit. Everything gets freed up, so then there's space for something else to come out and then there's space for something else to come out. So until all of those little pieces are out, there's always something in there that will make you feel unsafe.
And I think about when, within these Zooms and all these things that I'm doing, I'm always downloading videos and uploading videos and have all these files on my computers, which slows down a computer, right? Like when you have so many things overloaded, because if someone is thinking, oh, that sounds scary, I don't want to walk through that process and all that stuff coming up, I think it's important to note what you're already doing is scary.
Yeah.
Right? You're in situations, say being unsafe feels normal. You're used to your personal computer being overloaded, your systems being overloaded.
I think a lot of people are afraid of it because they don't understand how, if you're going to work with someone through complex trauma and complex PTSD, then there is a specific strategy that is completely effective and safe to use. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people do not know that this exists. Mm-hmm. So essentially, people go somewhere that may not be appropriate for processing trauma, and this person has them talking about stuff, which is the last thing you should do. It's kind of like, the Fight Club rules. First rule of Fight Club, we don't talk about Fight Club.
Yes.
Processing trauma, we don't talk about the trauma.
Yes. Yeah. So what is the strategy? What should people do if this feels normal to them?
It's delivered in 3 different phases. It's called a triphasic model. Mm-hmm. And in the first phase is a very expansive assessment. From the assessment, you just decipher exactly what symptom clusters there are and exactly what level of trauma there is. And then you create a treatment plan and you stabilize someone and you resource someone. The way you stabilize someone is you eliminate flashbacks, you bring down hyperarousal, you bring up hypoarousal, you bring them out of dissociation, you give them regulation for their emotions. You're working to rewire the trauma network in their brain. Mm-hmm. And when they're completely stable and emotionally regulated, and you've done a number of other types of integrating negative thinking processes and stuff, only then will you begin to process the actual trauma and target the traumatic events. After that's occurred, it's called the reintegration phase. And so a lot of people I work with have only ever known trauma. They didn't have a life before trauma. So they have nothing to gauge a new life against. So it's called reintegration. So you reintegrate all the new skills that they have, and you start integrating a new way of being. So that's working on interpersonal relationships and giving them all the tools for that. Lots of boundary work. Mm-hmm. For example, there was somebody that I worked with, and she was about 40, and she'd never known anything but trauma. And at the end of it, processing, she said, I don't know how to talk to people. And I was like, okay. So we went and sat in a park and watched other mothers that were interacting in the playground around the children, and to show her how it's okay to talk to people, to say, you can say these sorts of things, or notice how they're not talking about those sorts of things, but they're talking about these sorts of things. And so you've got to reintegrate a whole new skill set for some people. But it's a 3-phase model.
Well, that's what people are talking about. It's like, I don't even know what a healthy relationship is.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Yeah.
Both a healthy relationship with yourself and with others. Yeah. Right. I love this, Rachel. This is so good. Tell people where they can find more about you.
Me? Oh, okay. So I have a website. It's called Integrated Trauma Solutions. I created the integration of trauma solutions because when I was growing up, I knew there was something so wrong, but it wasn't what other people thought it was. People just thought, oh, I've got a mental health problem. They weren't taking into account that I'd been abused quite severely from age 3 years old. And they weren't taking into account that I was sleeping rough at 13, and they weren't taking into all of these things into account. It was just there was something wrong with me. But I knew there must be a why.
Mm-hmm.
I knew there must be some other answer. So I created this company in order to train other professionals in how to treat trauma effectively. And that's part of what I do. So I've written education programs, they're accredited, training programs that are accredited to help people learn this model and to integrate it into their practice. I also treat people on a one-to-one basis, and at the moment my new project is to upload like 10 sessions of stabilization that people can just access online, 10 sessions of emotion regulation, 10 sessions of psychological education. So that's a work in progress because I'm always quite busy with people.
Yes.
But yeah, essentially there's the website. I'm an associate of Freedom from Abuse, so there's a fair amount of me on that website as well with Marilyn Hawes.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and talking to us. Is there any last words of wisdom, like your one message that you just say, I wish everybody knew this?
Yeah, you can actually heal. It is available for you. You do have a choice. You are allowed to get better. It's not over.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm sad our conversation is over, so we'll have to reconnect again.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Awesome, Rachel. Thank you as you help us on our journey to become toxic person proof.
Absolutely.